Muchísimas gracias, doctora Alejandra
Thank you very
Corao.
much, Dr. Alejandra Corao, Interim Director of NUCIDA. Now we will have a panel while the interpreters recover due to the speed of Alejandra Corao's presentation. If we can have the camera, please. The panel today will be includes the representation of UN's AIDS, but we have someone else here, Guillermo Marquez, and also Ronald Cepedes, who at this moment is Executive Counselor of the Latin American Network and in the consortium of organizations developing a project with multiple countries called Alep. He lives in Sucre, the constitutional capital of the plurinational Republic of Bolivia. We had invited Stacy Velasquez as well. We're trying to see when she can connect, but it's also there's Stacy Velasquez. We all know her, but the people in the auditorium don't. She's from Guatemala, and in a way, she is a reflection of the communication gap when people are not able to get enough access or adequate access to participate. I will start with Ronald. Thank you for participating of this forum and the panel. Going back to Alejandra's presentation is something that we have talked about a lot with Ronald over the past 2 years. In a way, if Stacy, we have to LGBTQ. From your point of view, what are the main structural barriers that will persist and will continue for the next few years to be able to access for gay men, bisexual, SSH, and the rest, the transgender people for health services? Very good morning, good afternoon. In some countries, it'll even be good evening. Each one of you, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity to talk about this very important topic within the context of this forum regarding stigma and discrimination from Latin America. It's always important, I believe, to think about the world from Latin America and the Caribbean, our continent, through processes, similar processes throughout history, have been able to share oppression and also colonization. So, as from these recent centuries, the permanent resistance in our continent is also reflected in the spirit of resistance of people living with HIV and the populations affected by HIV. When I refer to affected populations with HIV, I'm talking about indigenous, peasants, migrants, immigrants, and women deprived of their freedom, users and consumers of drugs, and other populations that become visible within our continent and globally. Something that should be included within the context of your question, Javier, is that when we refer to structural processes, we're referring not only from a social standpoint, but also geopolitical to institutional forms that in spite of the actions that you can generate as a collective, together or individually, these are structural forms that always also have historical dynamics. And not only understand what's historical in terms of political terms, but also economic or financial. And to prove the syndemic due to COVID-19, we must not forget that from the structural standpoint, there's also a structural point or position economically that has an effect, an impact also. So when you read the resolution, the UN resolution on the political declaration on HIV, you feel that once again, this a document that has very good intentions, but it falls in the same mistake that we've seen with other similar declarations in the context of response to HIV. The objective elements that really affect to be able to provide a response in the mid or long term as to HIV is the need to understand the structural dynamics that have an impact on the intercultural and intergenerational aspects on what has to do with us when I refer to HIV. So on one hand, we can mention that we're at a time, and we have seen it throughout this declaration, that there is an emergency of a very conservative talk, speech that try to stop declarations that are a lot more radical or a lot more determined on how to approach the response to HIV. If you allow me to interrupt, we agree completely, but we're going towards the political declaration has already been signed and also joined by Bolivia, Guatemala, Argentina, etc. But within the more concrete and real world, the community, transgender communities, the sex workers still have a lot of barriers. How can we comply or meet these goals for 2025? Countries are already committed, and if you remember, if you can mention a few tips, what the structural barriers where we can make a difference as a civil society within the next 4.5 years. I could start, Javier, by strengthening the line of education. This forum is linked to Latin America in general, and we have seen that our populations have to access each time more to educational aspects to be able to be more competent or skillful professionals, and even break down the barriers of literacy and access to resources and other variables that obviously have a repercussion on the context of our continent. But on the other hand, strengthening the regional networks or local networks within each country could be a major factor. However, I believe, and with this would be my second contribution, one possible success in Latin America is that the people living with HIV, populations affected by HIV, do not limit their work only to the health sector or health field, but also from announcing that they are affected by HIV in other spaces, like the right to water, the citizen security, safety, and the person who lives with HIV or who forms part of a community affected by HIV, the policies in the great debates within our countries and the continent, that to be able to break away from this point of view, and people that live with HIV or affected by HIV should only talk about topics mentioned to health. It has to be much wider, intercultural, many nations, but it can be a contribution to break away or to question these structural issues, Javier. Thank you very much. We've got about 12 minutes for the panel. What I wanted to do was, because Alejandra mentioned it very quickly, because she mentioned many things in one presentation, and ask, okay, we'll do 3 minutes, and that way we can balance all this out. the presentations. Guillermo, what Alejandra mentioned about this alliance, the global alliance against all kinds of stigma and discrimination, this is something very important worldwide, but in Latin America especially, and how this alliance can help comply with this global strategy for AIDS. Thank you very much. I will try to be brief with a very large question. Historically, this political declaration 2016 and this process that was acknowledged, that the response to HIV had to be having respecting the basic and fundamental rights of men, and it was repeated in this process of the political declaration, and it has been affirmed and it has been established solidly within the new global strategy against and the stigma, and that have to do with human rights as far as access to basic services, health services for all, or healthcare to all the populations, men, women, key populations, many other populations here. It's important, as Alejandra said, as from the goals that have been set regarding stigma and discrimination, there is, and this platform was created, which is the Global Alliance to Eliminate Stigma and Discrimination Related to HIV. This is an alliance that basically, the important thing about this alliance is that it joins together important international players and actors, but basically, and more importantly, civil population. And they have established guidelines based, evidence-based, gathered throughout the years on the orientations that the countries must follow to eliminate and counter stigma and discrimination, especially in key populations in various fields. The important thing about this alliance is that it takes countries to accept some kind of political commitment, a commitment where the country they sign on and commit to take actions and steps specifically to combat and eliminate stigma and discrimination. But this political commitment, and the interesting thing about the alliance is that it's not only about the health ministry to eliminate stigma and discrimination. We have seen in some countries there are joint commitments, and they're stimulated, and you promote a multi-sectorial issue where the health ministry, together with the Secretariat of Human Rights, have assumed this commitment. When a country signs on with the alliance, they are politically committing, and we know that there is also that way you can start planning and assigning a budget, which is very important to be able to take action. The second point is that the alliance provides specific orientation, how to do it, where to do it, who to do it with, and where to do it to eliminate certain points, specific points in each population and in each context. Thank you, Guillermo. I have a question from the public here. You did reply part of it, but as you've mentioned, this alliance in Latin America and the Caribbean is coordinated by the regional of women sex workers. This has been, the question is, what will UNAIDS will do to assure that the governments and civil society, organizations in civil society can better communicate the messages of Walu and Wali, as we say in Spanish, and integrate those messages in policies to access treatment for HIV with the guidelines, and what else? It would be to listen the perspective of UNAIDS. This is one of the components within which it's integrated in this mandate of UN AIDS, that the strategy and that the countries adopt the policies, the measures that will transform their legislation, the legislative framework, and make sure that everything is updated technologically and scientifically. Well, I am going to establish a quick analogy to try to respond to this question. So, the common goal as far as objectives is 95, 95, 95. So, we need less infection, that the populations that live with HIV be healthy and live, be able to thrive in their lives. But to reach the 95, 95, 95, you have to eliminate these barriers that are 10, 10, 10, eliminate stigma, discrimination, eliminate violence, and eliminate the legal frameworks that have punitive laws and criminalize the condition itself of HIV and the use of drugs. So, to be able to eliminate and reach these goals, yes, we have to have a multisectorial response. And I insist with the participation, the formal participation, and structured and integrated within these decision making and planning of the civil society and the community, the communities. I mentioned communities because it's very important. These action, the indigenous communities, immigrants, and those who are deprived of their freedom are also very important and part of all this movement. In this case, we have to ensure that the negotiation tables and the decisions will be present, the civil society and all the communities, and that the governments establish the adequate, appropriate legal framework to demand the communities and the civil community, all the communities and civil society participate. This has to do with the dissemination, broadcasting, anything to do with information, communication, education, and what it means specifically in this case, that I equals I, but this applies to the new strategy and the response on the part of UN AIDS and civil society as well. Thank you, Guillermo.
Last 3 minutes, we have heard from Alejandra and Guillermo the 95, 95, 95 goals, and this will take place in 2026. That will be monitored in 2023, 2026. I would like to hear a brief thought from you. Do you believe we can achieve this? You believe we can, we can't? What would be the three items? Well, I know it's quite ambitious, impossible, or these goals could be achieved, in your opinion. Thank you, Javier. In this regard, I would like to make three contributions. First, it is important to strengthen the strategy, more involvement of the affected populations. And the affected populations are not included under a logic of citizenship, participation, and social control. I mean, not only to be subjects of mobilization, but also subjects who fiscalize the public policies of their governments. And we will have public policies, in that case, weak policies, non-sustainable policies, from a sincere willingness as to a response to HIV. Second, it is necessary, under the possibility of taking up the challenges of the political declaration, we need to understand the complexity of the everyday reality of the people who are affected by HIV. So, not only can we expect from a government to have access to more drugs, I mean, health supplies or to reduce the gaps between stigma and discrimination, but also to give those who live with HIV or who are affected by HIV a better quality of life to live fine, to live well. In the context of Bolivia, living okay does not mean that you are healthy, but also to have the conditions, the surrounding conditions, the relationship with the earth, so that your personality individually and a community, so that you can live well together with the community. And this goes beyond a logic that might be limited to anthropocentrism. The other aspect is the need to extend the debate globally. The social networks can allow us to have a very important element, networks, and this means a strength so that activists from different continents can face and see what is happening in our countries. Clear, perfect. And also very serious violations to human rights for our populations. And I want to conclude by saying that some governments will not like this. Thank you very much. We have just a few seconds. Guillermo Marquez de Lucida, Ronald from Alep, and now with the next panel, Professor Nelson, and this is just starting.